Today I'll be reading John chapter 21, 15 through 19 from the CEB translation. When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus asked the second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Take care of my sheep." He asked a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was sad that Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. I assure you that when you are younger, you tied your own belt and walked around wherever you wanted. When you grow older, you will stretch out your hands and another will tie your belt and lead you where you don't want to go." He said this to show the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After saying this, Jesus said to Peter, "Follow me." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Before I go any further, I would like to say how vital and important the prayer partners we had on the trip were. It was really a gift and an exciting thing for each of us every night to hear about someone that was back here praying for us and supporting us. So just real quick, because you were a huge part of our trip, if you were a prayer partner for us, could you stand? Yay! It doesn't take a lot to do, but it really does make a difference, and it really does make an impact on our kids. So thank you so much for doing that. As we saw in our skit and as we heard in the scripture, Peter needed a self-check. Our before Peter was ashamed, he was unsure, he was defensive, and he was scared. But our after Peter, he was more open and loving, humble, and eager to accept his calling. Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. Well, we're the sheep, but what does that mean? I tend to think of sheep as these cute little fuzzy creatures that are all cuddly and, just kind of go with the flow, but the more I looked into it and did a little bit of research, I learned some things about these sheep I thought were so fuzzy and comfy. Sheep are timid and fearful. They are stupid and gullible. They are subject to follow the crowd with a mob mentality. They are vulnerable to fear, frustration, pests, and hunger, so they don't like to be uncomfortable. They are easily influenced. They can be jealous and competitive. They are stubborn and insist on having their own way. It's easy for them to get stuck in a rut, and they're needy. Well, that sounds like some people I know, but it also sounds a lot like I can be, and it sounds a lot like the Peter that we met before he really allowed himself to trust Jesus. When I think back on our week in Indianapolis, I'm overwhelmed with this huge sense of gratitude. Gratitude for our safety there and back. Gratitude for the guidance and the wisdom of others. Gratitude for those who helped us so we can help others. Gratitude for the life that we get to live here. And so much gratitude to have spent a week with this amazing team. It was really wonderful to watch how God brought all of our talents and our gifts together in a way that no one else could. It was so beautiful because everyone went to serve where God could best use them. And at one point, Amy Carson asked me if I had helped make the teams and the assignments, and I had no input on it whatsoever. And that just showed me and reassured me that God was at work before we even got there. On the last night of the trip, as we do every night on these types of trips, we were gathered in the hallway and we were sharing our God moments with each other. And it was a very real and vulnerable moment. Most of us were crying because we were being honest and real with each other about how God had worked in us that week. Some of the program staff overheard us, and we invited them to join us. And after we had shared with them, Maddie, who was one of the program coordinators, said that we're the group that made the summer worth it. That she saw in our youth something that she hadn't seen in another group yet that summer. She said that they let themselves be changed, and they didn't fight God working in them. And I think that's wonderful. But I'm honestly not surprised. I've yet to be on a trip, a mission trip with this group, and not have comments come from those who actually facilitate the mission trip saying that our kids were one of the biggest blessings to them. That's why our kids are so awesome. They really, really are. And I'm very, very proud of them because they let themselves be reframed. So we had some struggles. Some of our sheepish traits had their moments where they liked to come out and be very loud. But they were so eager to serve God and to serve others that by the end of the week, they'd all fallen away, and we were just there together. And that's why that drum circle means a lot to me, because we weren't off in our own little cliques. We came together, and we made something together. And so that's why I wanted to share that with you in the video. So in some of our groups, I'd like to tell you about those. Abby, Jackson, and for the last part of his week, Tyler, worked at the Boys and Girls Club in Indianapolis. Each night they would come back and tell us about this new little friend that they'd made, and that was just really cool. And Abby especially was really surprised by that because she didn't expect that to happen. Well, that's at least what she told us. But they didn't do anything fancy or magical or super showy. They were just there. They just spent time with those kids. They were just present. And sometimes that's the best way that we can show God's love. They were reframed. Bianca, Clifton, Emily, Hannah, and Lauren went to an assisted living facility each day. This group was faced with some really fun moments, some learning opportunities, but also they did encounter real heartache and loss. And if you'll allow me, I would like to say how proud I am of Hannah because she was faced with a very difficult situation that I wouldn't have blamed her if she'd asked to be switched to a different site. The first day she was given the job to deliver mail to the residents, and there was one gentleman in particular that she went and took mail to. She was in his room, and then when they returned the next day, he had passed away during the night. And this was a very real experience with how sudden loss can be. But she didn't give up. She stayed there. She kept serving, and she kept loving. And along with the other people in her group, they read the paper to the residents. They played cards with them. They led their exercise class. They did all kinds of neat things. And their view was reframed. Amy, Ellery, Kat, Lane, and Mallory all worked at a food distributor. Each day leading up to Thursday, like Ellery shared, they worked to prepare food for those in need to come through and shop. This group stayed very committed while they were working. And even though Ellery didn't say this, early in the week, a lot of their tasks seemed tedious and unnecessary. And I'm sure it was really hard to see how the work that they were putting in was going to make a difference. But then Thursday came. And when we got back to our base camp, all they could say was how it made the whole week worth it. Because they saw thousands of faces come through from all different situations, and they were all different ages, and they saw God in them. They were able to give to them. Their view was reframed. Rob, Connor, and Tyler, during the other half of his week, worked with a ministry that gathered various donations from people in the community. These donations were sold. It sounds kind of like our Angel's Attic. They were sold at a much lower price, and the funds that they raised went to keeping and maintaining their facilities, and also towards their food bank and the many other projects that this ministry tries to do. One of the coolest things that they shared with us about their site was that whatever didn't fit into the store was loaded up and shipped to Africa to be used there by communities that were in need. These guys were faced with many adventures as they went to work each day. One day when they got here, there was a moving van that had a faulty back door that was really hard to get open and closed, so they had to be very resourceful, and they got there. Another day they got to this site, and they were greeted with a semi-truck, and their task was to fill the semi-truck with bags and all kinds of other items to be shipped to Africa. But in the midst of that mountain of a task, they shared stories of how they came up with a fun way to help pass the time but still get the task done. Despite all of the lifting and the moving this group had to do, they found a way to spread love and joy in the midst of that. Their view was reframed. Allison, Grant, Gwenny, Quint, Sophia, Tanner, Whitney, and myself, as probably one of our biggest groups, went to an assisted living facility in northern Indianapolis. And I watched as we were all changed that week because of the residents that we met. We were awkward at first. We didn't know our place at first. But when we got back the second day, they had missed us, and they were glad that we had come back. And so we let ourselves start to create relationships with them and to develop friendships with them. And we just grew to love them, and they loved us back. And I know that our group can't help but smile when they think of Wayne and Lillian, Dawn and Bill, Vivian, Elsie, and so many others that we got to meet and learn from. We were reframed. There was one lady in particular that taught me a lesson I've needed to learn for a long time, and I'd like to share that with you. Some of the girls and I were given the job to open up a nail salon for the residents. So the first lady that they brought to my station, her name was Elsie. And she was very quiet, but very sweet. She was soft-spoken, but she was more than willing to share her story and tell about her life. And she really reminded me a lot of my Nana, so I really felt like I had a connection with her beyond just meeting her. Elsie wanted to love and be loved. It was that simple. And isn't that what we all really want anyway? She carried around these 2 gorilla stuffed animals and called them her babies, and we loved her for it because she just loved without rules or restraints. On our last day, we were walking around as a group to say goodbye to the residents, and we saw Elsie standing close to in her chair close to the nurse's desk. And the youth went through one at a time and gave her hugs and told her goodbye, and Elsie was crying. She was talking about how much she was going to miss us and how much she loved having us there. And she told us how pretty we were, especially Grant. It's true. So I went over and I hugged her, and since she and I had spent some extra time together, she squeezed me and she cried even harder, and she said more about how much she was going to miss us and why we had to go. So I knelt down the rest of the way, and she held my hand, and she just looked me in the eye and said, "I love you so much," while she was crying. And that moment really stuck out to me because sometimes it hurts to love people because they leave or there's situations that we can't help. But that didn't stop her. She just loved us anyway. And that was so beautiful to me. It was one of those moments that strike like lightning down to the core of your being. One of those moments that have the power to really change you as a person. My view was reframed. I know a lot of our team members had similar moments during that week, moments that made them look inside and see what needed to be reframed. What we started off seeing as piles of junk, smelly kids, tedious tasks, or old people who we couldn't relate to, changed into donations that will help make lives better. Kids who needed to play with someone outside of their community to see that the world was bigger than that negative atmosphere. We started to see work that needed to happen to prepare to feed the families that wouldn't have food any other way. And we saw wise souls that gave us the gift to learn from, to laugh with, and to build friendships with. Our views were reframed. Besides the reframing, the unifying theme of all of our sites is that there was love. Despite what it looked like, when we chose to answer the call to care for others, however that was, love was there. And when love's there, something happens. It can look so different, but it's still love. And when we love, we get a new perspective that goes beyond our views, our misconceptions, our stereotypes, and our differences that we have with other people. Those can be reframed with love. Reframed to feed the lambs, but also be fed. To take care of the sheep, but also to trust others to take care of you. And to feed the sheep and allow yourself to be fed more. We are called to love and to be loved. It's a two-way street. But sometimes we let those sheepish habits like stubbornness, fear, jealousy, refusing to change, we let those get in the way. But if we could let that pass away, beautiful things could happen. So I want you to think about it. What sheepish things do you think you need to let fall away? Where might God be leading you to reframe the ways that you love other people? Just think about how differently this world would look if we stopped framing people by their stereotypes, their differences, or these labels that we put on them, but if we started framing them with the love of God. People as people. God calling us to love Him and to love people. We can reframe our world. We got a head start in Indianapolis, but now our prayer is that that can continue with you all as a church body and as a community so that everyone knows what it's like to love and be loved.